hope you enjoyed some of the fun facts about how you see the world in these talks and that you learned something about yourself that you didn't know before. Let's let's start this talk by circling back to where we started this journey. We started with chimera, phantoms. I mean, the title of this series of talks is Chasing Phantoms. In the first talk, we saw how both Laplace and Mark Twain were well aware of having phantoms, chimera, and what they had in mind in this situation were the social psychological constructs that were held up as values, as leading the good life, values that they felt maybe they were enslaved to, that really didn't satisfy, and sometimes can even hold us back. The good life, success, these can be traps. These can be fantasies that we get involved with and take over. These can do us a lot more harm than good. I mean, it's great to have goals, and nothing succeeds like success. But now this is a very valid form of phantom and a very something that many of us have to deal with. But it gets more subtle than that. We saw how Baudelaire, in the middle of the 19th century, discussed chimera as burdens that we were blind to. We just accepted as part of our lives. They stooped us over, weighed us down, clawed at our chests, and we often didn't see them as something separate from us. We imbibed them. We let them take over. They determined who we were, what our life is. Now, and also in that first talk, I mentioned a couple of Buddhist sutras to point out that this is a question that has been going on for a long time. One was the Lankavatara Sutra. Now, keeping the perspective of all the things we've talked about, projections, illusions, whether certain things we see are really there, even if they're true in our experience. So the Lankavatara Sutra, and I quote, encourages us to see things as devoid of self-existence. Parenthetically, that means as inherently solid and essential, permanent and real. To see them as illusions or mirages or dreams, or moonlight on water, regardless of whether they appear to be inside or outside the mind, as projections from the beginningless past, and not existing apart from one's own mind. You know, like color, rainbows, many of the visual illusions, the spots that weren't there when you looked at them. We examined a lot of examples of this together. The Lankavatara Sutra goes on, where freedom from projection prevails, impartial wisdom arises. Wow, that's quite a promise. Now, we also started with the Buddha in another sutra, the Shurangama Sutra, asking, where is vision? And it was easy for us, as it was for the Buddha, to say, well, it's certainly not in the eye, or at least not solely in the eye. We could certainly chase it back to the brain, but there we kind of lost the trail. The Surangama Sutra concludes that the senses are, and again I quote, the true, wondrous, luminously understanding mind that contains body and everything outside the body. Huh. I mean, really, that's kind of cool. But what is the true, wondrous, luminously understanding mind that contains the body and everything outside the body? Now, I don't know. And I'm not being cute. I have ideas, but so what? I'm not a Buddhist teacher. I'm not a Buddhist philosopher. I'm not an academic with expertise on Buddhist concepts. And for that matter, you might not care. I'm not even so sure I care that much about what ancient Buddhists said. Actually, I kind of care, but that's me. But well, I wanted to circle back to it because that's the answer they gave almost 2 millennia ago. And I brought up the Surangama, and I didn't want to leave you hanging. Now that does, though, bring us to mind. At one point, I asked, where do we see what we see. Who sees what where? I mean, what's the screen that the brain plays the image on once it goes through all its shenanigans? You, me, scientists, philosophers, we can ask, what is mind? How do we, what observes the senses? What senses the senses? Including, as the Buddhists have it, thought, the words and images in our heads, because as I mentioned in the first talk, that's how Buddhists see the brain, as a kind of sense organ that senses itself, that senses thoughts. But where are you in all this? Where am I in all this? Where do salience and qualities reside? Where and what is experience? I mean, that's what we care about, right? That's what perception is. Because really, certainly, that's the one place you are found, even if just in the moment. Some say mind is just all in the brain. It's the tissues, the neural impulses, the patterns that create a mind. Of course, the brain does brain things, as we talked about, and is critical to the story. But nobody's found a screen there. Nobody's found the final, this is where the you sees the not you. Or the you sees your thoughts and reacts to it. There's no me part of the brain that's been found. In our story, at best, we just saw nested nodes of function with incredibly complex interconnections and feedback loops that work in a small fraction of a second to make an experience out of an impulse of light. Now, others deny that mind exists as anything but an illusion. And in a way, some of the scientists are suggesting that when they say it's an emergent property of all these impulses. Now, still others, and this is more controversial in some people's mind, so to speak, posit that mind resides in the fabric of the universe. And that kind of comes in two flavors. In panpsychism, mind is inherent in the substance or essence that makes up the universe. Whatever that substance or essence is. I mean, is it strings? Is it brains, like in BRANES, membranes? That's part of string theory. Is it quantum fields? It's certainly not particles, because they are evanescent and part of quantum fields. But they still want there to be a fabric of the universe, something that, a substance that's an essence that's there. In some forms of idealism, or in Buddhism, mind-only philosophies, mind is the foundation of the universe. There's no deeper essence. That the substance of the universe, whether it's fields, strings, whatever, to everything we see and experience, and that evolves, derives from mind. Now, maybe another way of looking at it is something like John Wheeler's participatory universe. So Wheeler was a physicist in the 20th century who was very well respected, a brilliant man. He's the one who coined a lot of the terms we use, like black hole. When he contemplated what this was about, he drew this image, which is a U for the universe with an I looking at this U, as if the universe participates in its own development. Another metaphor that goes way back is that we are waves or currents in the vast ocean of what is true, that our individual existence, that the individual existence of anything is part of the functioning of this vast universe, cosmos, consciousness, ocean. We are that function made manifest in the same way that a wave or current in the Earth's ocean is the manifest functioning of the Earth's ocean. Now, I like those last two metaphors. I like them a lot. But honestly, they're just metaphors. And after all, metaphors are intellectual constructions. They're limited by language and what we can grasp. They're not meant to be anything more. Anything more. So let's step back and step back a moment and ask, how might we understand what we covered in these 6 talks without complex and speculative concepts, without philosophical models or metaphors, and without waiting for new discoveries in neuroscience that may or may not happen in our lifetimes? What can we see now in our lives without adding bells and whistles that actually can kind of distract by creating new phantoms, new projections of our hopes, fears, limitations, what we want to believe, really just that reify, that make real and concrete our delusions, our needs. What can we learn? This is really what these talks have been about. What can we learn by observing nature, by observing ourselves as nature, because there's no separation, of course. One thing we saw in these talks is how we experience the world through the senses is a process. It's a process that is the product of a vast yet intimate web of interactions from time before time, relationships in relationships, wheels within wheels. And that web is experienced and fashioned not only in deep time evolution, but anew in our own lives in each moment. There is no brain, there is no eye, there's no vision, no color, no rainbow, as we know, no spots in the optical illusion. There's no us in isolation. Now, why is that important to us? Or is it just another phantom? Well, it could be, of course, depending how you approach it and what it means to you. But the reason I think that's important to us and why I bring it up is because it means that we can start with our experience, with what we sense and with our consciousness. I mean, remember, this isn't just about vision. I could have used any of the senses. And we can follow that thread. We can do that because we are that thread. It isn't separate or distant. It is part and parcel. No separation. Believing that perception is reality, unfiltered and true, objectively real in some reified, concrete way, we act on that belief so often. And we saw in these talks that that's just an illusion. We evolved to survive. We didn't evolve our senses to see some unfiltered reality. We don't even come close. This is true, whatever philosophy or religion you might prefer. I mean, take your pick. All of this still works. You could add whatever flavoring, you could package it up however you like. I'm not trying to convince you to see things a certain way, but just to look and see what you see. Can we really drop all projections and find the wisdom that the Lankavatara Sutra says lurks behind our phantoms? What happens when we peel the layers of the onion of illusion, taking away, seeing through our phantoms until there's no onion left? Do we just disappear? Or is that just a concern about ending up as nothing, as just another phantom? Just another phantom or chimera that we chase that prevents us from seeing what we can see. So let's focus on what's important. And I'm going to speak for myself because I'm the one talking. Must we chase our projections, our desires, fears, hopes, and expectations? I mean, do we have a choice? Perhaps examining the nature of perception, our stories, our phantoms, feeling the chimera clawing at us and bending us over as we stoop under the weight of our illusions allows us the flexibility to be compassionate with ourselves and others. Can we try to see past our limited views, find our blind spots, try to understand that they are inherently limiting and finite, and that they are hurting us, causing us and others pain and suffering? Maybe we don't have to be owned by them. Do we have to be ruled by greed, fear, and anger? Can you use the pain, the limitations, or do they always have to use you? I mean, look, it's really difficult to attain clarity by intellect alone. This exercise that we're going through here, it's not going to suddenly say, oh, I see some fact and therefore I'm clear, I'm compassionate, and I'm enlightened, whatever. I mean, existentialists and Stoics and some psychological fields of study do heavily rely on the intellect, and there's nothing wrong with that. If it helps, that's great. But I think that at some point it's much like you can't really think or force yourself into love. You experience it, you live it. Now, I'm not a spiritual teacher or a therapist. If you This is not a therapeutic exercise. Get help if you need it. Don't use all this as just another head trip to further spiral into your delusions. I've seen that. I've seen these ideas and ideals used that way by people who want to rationalize what they believe. I've seen it, and it isn't pretty. I recommend you have a touchstone, a compass. Find what works for you. My personal working hypothesis as a human navigating the world is my practice as a student of Zen Buddhism. Why I chose to have a meditation practice is that beyond my limited point of view, I sense I am part of something, much like the ocean and wave or the participatory universe. And I think this is one way for me to explore that. But what is true to your experience, to your vision? Like Laplace, it's probably not going to be fame when you face the end. Accomplishments, uh, those are out of context, not going to satisfy, I suspect. And why wait to the end? You give your life meaning. You know the experience of suffering and joy. You know what you mean by love. You create the rainbow, the colors, the vision. You're the universe unfolding. Embrace it. Thanks for going on this journey with me.